Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The imposition of a sugar tax on some soft drinks will move a little closer in next week's budget when the Treasury announces how much the rate of the levy will be. Celebrities like Jamie Oliver will be happy. They've been campaigning for action against childhood obesity such as this for a while. But for Dia Chakravarti of the Taxpayers Alliance, the proposals are regressive and don't actually make any sense. Here's her soapbox.
In just over a week's time, the Chancellor in his budget statement will tell us exactly how much tax he will be slapping onto some sugary drinks. A great win for the nanny state champions. For the rest of us, not so much. For a start, this tax will hit the poorest families hardest. These so-called consumption taxes, like this one, and ones on, say, tobacco or alcohol, hit poorer families harder because they pay a greater portion of their income in these taxes. Hardly a recipe to help hard-pressed families. What makes the plans even worse is that evidence suggests that the tax might not even work. So, while the consumption of drinks like these might go down, these drinks are exempt from the scheme, even though they contain just as much sugar. So what's the point, really? People will just get their sugar fix from somewhere else. There's plenty of evidence from abroad that it doesn't work. They introduced a tax on sugary drinks in Mexico not that long ago, and yes, the consumption of these drinks did go down, and the number of calories also went down by a whopping 5 a day. People simply got their calories another way. You can potentially tax people away from cigarettes, because the alternatives to them, like e-cigarettes or nicotine patches, are actually healthier than tobacco. But that's not necessarily the case with the alternatives to sugary drinks. A study in America found that a similar tax resulted in a rise in the sales of beer. Hardly the alternative we're after. And even if it did work, is it really necessary? There's plenty of evidence to suggest that obesity has actually peaked, and it is public information campaigns that actually are more effective in bringing about real change in people's lifestyles. This is just an ill-considered way for the Treasury to raise some money, but hurting the poorest families in the process. So while our politicians, in their smugness, can pick up one of these sugary drinks on their way to more nannying, tax-free, anyone buying these sugary drinks will be penalised. Doesn't quite make sense, does it?
And Dia Chakravarti is here. I mean, a lot of drinks manufacturers have already lowered the amount of sugar in their drinks to avoid higher taxes. So, in effect, the levy's worked.
Well, this has been happening for a long time. So by DEFRA's own figures, sugar consumption peaked at around the 1970s, and since then we consume about 20% less sugar. Since 1992, we consume about 16% less sugar. So that has been happening for quite a long time. We can't really say it has happened because of this.
Is it necessary to have a sugar tax?
Yes, I'd also like to see stronger commitments to reduce levels of sugar in products, restrictions on advertising, a big public health information campaign, and more investment in things like child sport. Look, the reason we've got to do this is obesity-related illnesses are costing the NHS £6 billion a year. And, you know, the obesity is a huge problem. This isn't a silver bullet, but I think as part of a measure of things, it could make a real difference in bringing obesity levels down.
And surely, as the Taxpayers Alliance, you would be pleased at any move that would actually reduce costs for the NHS. And obesity, according to Public Health England, cost the NHS £4.2 billion.
If it worked, sure, there would be a good argument for it.
But what's your evidence that it wouldn't work?
I think even the people who are bringing this in think it's not going to work. So in the words of one of the the most vocal advocates of it. It's just a symbolic slap on people's lifestyle. We know it's not going to work because the government's already spent the 520 million. I think it wishes to raise from it, because we know that people's lifestyle doesn't change that way, and the alternatives here are not necessarily healthier.
Right.
As is the case with, say, alcohol, for example. As alcohol and tobacco, for example. The alternatives may well be healthier. That is not necessarily the case here.
Although we've seen a massive drop in the number of people who smoke to the same extent. I mean, if you look at the figures in Mexico, which you cited, there's a 5.5% drop in consumption of sugary drinks in the first year. There's been a 9.7% drop in the second year. And actually, from what I've read, the health impact is not yet known. But that severe drop in consumption must be a good thing.
Well, it would if, it doesn't really work to the extent that we wish it to work. Another example would be the fat tax in Denmark, which they spent about 200 million kroner, I want to say, in bringing it in. It simply didn't work. 15 months later, they completely scrapped it.
They found that people had gone, into the neighbouring countries to get
exactly.
I don't think it's a silver bullet, but it is part of what we've got to do. And my worry is people like your good selves are always against any intervention by the state. My preference is always to limit sugar, fat and salt in food. If you want to sprinkle a bit more sugar on your Frosties, fine. But we've got to take action. And what's your alternative?
My worry
what's your
is
alternative?
Sure, but public health campaigns which have worked. I don't know why you can't take.
Well, the money's been cut from quite a few public health campaign
budgets. But it has been working. This is a point. If our sugar consumption did peak in the 1970s, then we have been doing something right.
Sugar consumption is rampant. It is severely
but this
addictive.
This is DEFRA's own account. We're not making the figures up. But I think, just quickly, Joe, there's an important point I think here. I think our politicians, with the greatest respect to the both of you, get really seduced by this idea of being seen to do something.
I'm not seduced by anything.
Let's not, John Redwood.
What the evidence about what works
though, Liz,
from this country and abroad.
Well,
the evidence, Liz, is that the poorest families are going to get hit the hardest, and it's not going to even work.
Are you seduced by the pressure lobby campaigns on this issue of putting a tax on sugary items like fizzy drinks?
Well, I think we've heard two very powerful advocates today. And there's good in both.
Yes.
And I think it's absolutely right that we've got a major obesity problem and a diabetes problem, and anything that can highlight that and help to deal with it.
But will this work?
It is quite right that before the government takes specific action, it's got to make sure that there is evidence to say that this will have the desired impact. What it's clearly doing is creating the public conversation, and I think you agree with me that that's probably even more important, to have the public conversation so that people understand that they're damaging their own health if they go to extremes in these areas.
The evidence is quite stark. You got it from health professionals. You do also have it from celebrities. You have it from Cancer Research UK, estimating a 20% tax on sugary drinks could prevent 3.7 million cases of obesity over the next decade.
Isn't it?
Yeah, well, but that's the thing. Do you believe the experts here?
No, I don't believe the experts on most things because they
we know.
wrong.
Right. So you don't. So but would you support this tax being even broadened further to include other items with high levels of sugar?
Well, I think there is some impact. When I say don't believe that, of course, experts have expertise, and I respect expertise, but there are an awful lot of these spot forecasts, as we've seen with Treasury and Bank of England and IMF forecasts, are completely wrong, and you've got to be critical about what they do when trying to apply their knowledge. And this may be another case where I think it's very unlikely it would be that exact number. But is it pointing in the right direction?
And
probably yes.
And
that's what you have
One
to
of the
look
Isn't it crazy that
problems
milkshakes and other high sugar coffees are exempt?
Well, that's, I think that's the problem. One of the big issues, though, is really understanding how much sugar is in anything. A lot of it is really hidden. Unless you obsessively read the back of packets to see
and
how
it takes
much sugar
ages
there
in the
is. And
supermarket
it takes
to do
ages.
that.
So I'd like to see a much clearer system of labelling so that people can take an informed decision.
Information is a good thing. It has to be said. But you're talking about fruit juices as well. How many things are you actually going to tax? And like I said, even the advocates, Jamie Oliver himself, it was a symbolic slap. To people like Jamie Oliver, that little bit of extra money paid in tax doesn't really count. But it does to many, many poor families. And that's the issue here. I can't believe that the politicians are not hearing this.
Are you proud that it's a Conservative government that's going to bring this in?
I'm proud that they're looking at the problem and trying to find a solution. I look forward to hearing their explanations. But I find in the supermarket when I'm buying my food, I value the extra information, but it does make it a very long-winded task trying to buy things because it's not presented in a similar way on each packet. And there are so many things you're now watching for, because experts have told us that so many things can be damaging to us, that it's then quite tempting to say, I'm in a hurry, I'm just going to buy this.
I mean, if this extra tax money actually goes on something we know is really important,
Well, it is supposed to be going on sport in schools.
I think that would make a massive difference. We've got to make sure the extra tax, the revenue, is tied with getting kids active and moving
But it
again.
can't possibly do both, can it? It can't raise the revenue it wishes to and have an impact
Well,
on
it
people's
could.
lifestyle.
The
It'll
government
just
could
take
take
the
a
money,
decision.
greater proportion of the poorest families' money in tax. That's all it's going to do.
Dear Chakravarti, thank you.
I've been getting